Policy Committee for February 1st, 2023 to order. Quorum is present, so we will get started. First item on our agenda today is approval of the minutes. Representative Hornstein, may I have a motion to
I would move the minutes, Madam Chair.
Representative Hornstein moves approval of the minutes from January 25th, 2023. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. So, good morning, everybody. I'm really excited for the presentation that we have today. I'm going to kind of take a second and kind of share my thoughts around this a bit and why I invited invited our agencies to present the climate budget. I was driving home last night and was thinking about our infrastructure and how it's like our body. It's Minnesota's body. And we need every single part of that infrastructure to make sure that we're functioning properly. And so I think the one thing that we're kind of missing from it is the heart and the brain, maybe more the brain than the heart. And so that's kind of my goal through this committee, is to really try and figure out how we best coordinate all these infrastructure systems. And so knowing that it has a real impact on our resiliency as a state, not only just our resiliency to weather events, but also our economic resiliency, our social justice resiliency. And so I'm excited to kind of start looking at our infrastructure system in a more holistic picture. And so with that, I will turn it over to our testifiers. Today, we're going to be hearing from several agencies on the climate action items in the governor's budget recommendations. The MPCA is taking point on presenting, but it's my understanding that we have a number of agencies on hand to answer questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Kessler and Assistant Commissioner Kolash. So please introduce yourself for the record and begin with your presentation.
Good morning, Chair Cagle and members of the committee. We're excited to be here. I'm Katrina Kessler, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and with me is Frank Kolash, Assistant Commissioner at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for Air and Climate Policy. We're going to share the presentation this morning, and as noted, we have representatives from the agencies whose budget items are included in the governor's climate change budget, and they are happy to help address any questions that the committee may have. So I'm up here today because I also serve as the chair of the governor's climate change subcabinet, and we've been working coordinatively across agencies through the development of the climate action framework, which we'll talk about, as well as the budget. So happy to be here to present this collective work. So as I noted, the work of the governor's climate change budget reflects the work of the whole subcabinet. This group includes state leaders from 15 different agencies, departments, and boards. Many of those are here today to help answer questions. And as a reminder, the subcabinet was created to rally the resources of state government to ensure that the state agencies are acting together to develop policies and strategies that reduce greenhouse gases and prepare our communities and our state for a changing climate. In September of last year, the Climate Change Subcabinet released the Minnesota Climate Action Framework, and some of you were there for that event and really appreciate your energy around this work. The framework was developed with input for more than 3,000 Minnesotans and is designed to guide our work to prepare the state in the coming years. It identifies immediate, near-term actions we must take to achieve our long-term vision of a carbon-neutral, resilient, and equitable state for our future. The framework is organized around 6 goals. Clean transportation represents our greatest opportunity to reduce carbon pollution. We can connect Minnesotans with sustainable and affordable transportation options. We can also grow climate-smart working lands and forests to absorb carbon, reduce emissions, and sustain local economies. We can build resilient communities by equipping local leaders with the tools they need to adapt to extreme weather caused by climate change. Investing in clean energy and efficient buildings will create jobs and lower energy costs. And we can ensure healthy lives and communities across Minnesota, keeping in mind that some communities experience impacts of climate change more than others. And finally, transitioning to a clean economy with climate solutions will benefit everyone, creating new jobs in every corner of our state. So every proposal in the 2023 climate change budget is designed to help us meet these goals and achieve the vision articulated in the climate action framework. So as I noted, the Climate Action Framework serves as the foundation for the proposals. The proposals span 11 agencies or entities and total more than $716 million and represent important investments and actions to make progress in each of the 6 goals that I discussed previously. Overall, the budget positions the state well to equitably accelerate reductions in greenhouse gases and build resilience. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Assistant Commissioner Kolash to walk through the transportation components of the budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. For the record, my name is Frank Kolash. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Assistant Commissioner for Air and Climate Policy at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I'll start by talking about the Clean Transportation Goal Chapter. And we know that transportation is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in Minnesota and represents a critical priority to reduce pollution that contributes to climate change. We believe we can connect and serve all people through a safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation system. A clean transportation system that's providing walking, biking, rolling, and transit options that are accessible, safe, and plentiful. It also includes the planning, infrastructure, and education needed for cleaner vehicles and fuel technologies, including both electric vehicles and biofuels. Within this goal area, we have a number of priority actions identified in the framework, increasing the funding for non-motorized transportation, directing resources towards a statewide pedestrian and bicycle network, increasing transit systems, planning land use and transportation together, continuing to explore opportunities for a clean fuel standard, expanding regional charging, and developing a Minnesota electric vehicle charging plan. You'll see from the proposals that the governor is advancing within this goal area, and with each goal area, they are designed to help us achieve these goals. We will walk through some of these proposals individually today, but in the interest of times, we're not able to highlight every proposal in the package, but you will see the full package reflected on index slides, such as the one you have in your packets, and individual agencies also have other items that accomplish climate-related objectives, but that were not part of our collaborative interagency work. The first proposal I will talk about is MnDOT's Maximize the Federal Transportation Climate Funding. This proposal from MnDOT is for $2 million in base general funds to leverage federal funding for climate-related programs from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This ensures that MnDOT has the necessary resources and staff to implement the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act programs and fully leverage new federal programs to reduce carbon, improve resilience, and support electric vehicle charging. These recommendations came out of the work of the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council and the Climate and Resiliency Work Group that MnDOT operates. The next budget item that I want to highlight is the Metropolitan Council's development of a clean transportation system. The Met Council is proposing an appropriation of $29.2 million from the general fund for up to 30 40-foot public transit battery electric buses and charging infrastructure in lieu of purchasing replacement diesel buses. The supplemental budget request would accelerate the zero-emission fleet transition by 2 years and allow the council to exceed their goal of having at least 20% of the bus replacements be zero-emission buses by 2027. The amount requested is the amount of funding needed above what has been allocated for diesel buses. And then the next budget item I want to provide an overview comes from the Department of Labor and Industry and Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure. The department is proposing adding requirements to the Minnesota State Building Code for electric vehicle charging infrastructure within or adjacent to new commercial and multifamily buildings. The proposal includes $163,000 in FY24 for rulemaking and stakeholder education, which will provide Minnesotans with more access to electric vehicle charging infrastructure in convenient locations and will increase the feasibility of EV use for Minnesotans, lead to an expansion of EV use in the state, and help decrease the greenhouse gas emissions associated with transportation in Minnesota. I'll now hand the microphone back to Commissioner Kessler.
So the next items that we want to highlight fall into the category of climate smart, natural, and working lands. To meet the goals in the climate action framework in this area, the budget calls for significant investments in our working and forested lands. This is key at this moment in time, as just yesterday, the MPCA and the Department of Commerce submitted our 2023 greenhouse gas emissions report to the legislature that shows that the agriculture and forest sector is now the #2 emitter of greenhouse gases in the state, and this is a result of concerted investment and significant decreases in the electric generation sector. We know that agricultural producers and foresters want to be doing more to mitigate greenhouse gases and to build resiliency, and this budget helps them do that. We also know that investments in this sector provide stacked benefits. For example, investments in soil health build resiliency and the capacity to sequester carbon and increase the ability of the soil and the root zone to maximize nutrients, minimizing the likelihood of excess nutrients ending up in groundwater or downstream surface water. Similarly, investments in grasslands and forests build resilience of those landscapes and also provide habitat for pollinators and native species. Goals within this area include expanding climate-resilient agriculture and forestry, incentivizing beneficial practices and assisting in implementation, including increases to accesses and technology, equipment, and seed planting, plant material, managing agricultural lands in a way that also reduces greenhouse gases, particularly potent methane and nitrous oxide, increasing water storage and infiltration and managing drainage, promoting local community-based agriculture to reduce transportation needs and increase local food access, especially in underserved communities, investing in new markets and supplies chains for crops that keep soil covered year-round, and for wood products that increase carbon storage and substitute for more fossil fuel-intensive materials, and finally, prioritizing groundwater and drinking water protection in vulnerable areas. The first proposal in this area comes from the Board of Water and Soil Resources and is for $13.58 million per year from the general fund to support voluntary, locally driven soil health programs. We know that increased intensity and duration of rain events due to the change in climate reduce water quality by increasing nutrient and sediment runoff, and we're also expecting that climate change will increase erosion and flooding. Healthy soils, on the other hand, reduce the speed and volume of which the runoff occurs and the need for structural water storage. Healthy soils similarly increase the availability of water to plants, which can increase yields and improve resiliency during dry periods. Healthy soils also reduce nutrient losses to surface water and groundwaters. We know that healthy soil practices can store large amounts of carbon, potentially offsetting greenhouse gas emissions, and investments in soil health pays huge dividends. The next proposal also comes from the Board of Water and Soil Resources and is for $17 million from the general fund for fiscal year 24 and 25, and $480,000 per year after that for a climate action accelerated water storage initiative. Increasing the use of water storage and flood retention structures provides an opportunity to mitigate the impacts of climate-driven increased runoff. The statewide climate mitigation and water quality proposal will implement retention bases, wetlands, ponds, and other water retention strategies. This work will make Minnesota more resilient to the effects of climate change and mitigate harm caused by high-intensity rainfall events. This slide summarizes the DNR proposals included in the climate change budget. And we've talked about how Minnesota's natural and working lands represent some of our most powerful resources in mitigating the impacts of climate change. Boulevard trees, grasslands, state or private forests, wetlands, and peatlands are all green infrastructure that store carbon, reduce flooding, provide habitat for plants, pollinators, fish, and wildlife, and provide Minnesotans with economic and recreational opportunities. Investments in natural and working lands mitigate climate change and enhance resiliency by reinforcing the natural systems and the natural infrastructure of our environment. Minnesota's public lands play an essential role in our state's climate solution. By investing in grasslands and wetlands, forest lands, we can mitigate and impact climate change and build the health of economies of our natural and our built environments. So these are the 6 proposals. The first is to enhance grasslands and restore wetlands that are rich in native plants, capture and hold more carbon, and help mitigate climate change. The second is for private forest landowner assistance. This would provide technical assistance, financial incentives via the DNR or local soil and water conservation districts or consultant foresters to provide woodland owners the needed assistance to advance health and management of their lands for multiple forest benefits. This type of assistance to local landowners to sustainably manage their forests is key to increasing carbon capture and storage while assuring healthy forests are in place. The next proposal is enhancing community forests. This is all about reforestation. Trees, we know, benefit Minnesota communities in many ways: store carbon, improve air quality, decrease stormwater runoff, and add to the aesthetic livability. This proposal would help communities, particularly those with fewer resources, address reforestation needs, especially those hit by things like emerald ash borer and other tree and pest diseases. This proposal is combined with $6 million in proposed bonding funds for the relief program. The next proposal is for accelerated tree seed collection. Tree seed collection is the first critical step in producing the seedling used by many public and private owners for reforestation. Current approaches to seed collection are under-resourced and not sustainable. This proposal would fund expansion of the DNR tree seed orchards and staff to implement the expansion that is needed and called for by both private and public landowners. The next proposal would restore streams and modernize water-related infrastructure. As we've talked about, climate change is impacting water quality and aquatic habitats through more intense rains and changes in flooding and washed-out roads. This proposal would replace culverts and bridges to improve stream ecology, remove or modify dams, and restore habitat to enhance fish passage and renovate other water control structures to address the impacts of climate change. And the last proposal on this slide, protecting and restoring carbon storage in state-administered peatlands. We know that peatlands hold approximately 37% of the carbon stored by Minnesota's ecosystem. So this is a particularly important area for investments. Nearly 60% of Minnesota's peatlands are located on state-owned public lands, many of which are school trust lands. And to maintain and enhance carbon storage, we must invest in new management strategies for our peatlands. The next slide comes from the Department of Agriculture, where they are proposing $1.5 million a year to continue the agri-biofuels infrastructure financial assistance program. So these grants help service stations upgrade their equipment, things like fuel dispensers, underground storage tanks, and associated equipment, so they can sell blends of gasoline that contain 15% or more of ethanol. Grants will be made to service stations in Minnesota and are independently owned or belong to chains of more than 10 stations or less. The next bucket of proposals address the sector called resilience community. So we know through a survey done by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that only 12% of Minnesota communities have a comprehensive plan to address the impacts of climate change that they are uniquely experiencing. Communities need financial aid and technical support to develop climate resilience plans that reflect their individual needs. And we can build resilient communities by equipping local leaders with the tools that they need to adapt to extreme weather caused by climate change. Actions like updating stormwater infrastructure to handle more rain, planting trees to provide shade, and providing communities with needed tools to map, like maps and data, will help protect Minnesotans from climate change. The climate change budget calls for significant investments in grants and technical assistance to local governments and tribes to help them access relevant climate data and assess climate vulnerabilities, develop plans and priorities that address their vulnerabilities, and implement projects to build resilience. Goals within this area include providing more resources for adaptation, including staff capacity, technical support, and training, increasing the capacity of the Green Steps Cities program, planting climate-ready trees and preserving mature trees, expanding green infrastructure and stormwater management control that controls flooding, adopting resilient building practices, assessing vulnerabilities at critical facilities, and combating heat island effects. So the first proposal that we will highlight comes from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. This directly expands the capacity of our local partners to develop and implement the plans that we've talked about. We've heard from mayors and public works leaders across the state that there is a need to access those downscale data that reflect climate threats to their communities and technical support to model stormwater systems, develop asset management plans for their water, wastewater, and electric and other utilities and infrastructure, and the money to implement projects consistent with their local needs and plans. These grants and technical assistance will allow recipients to assess infrastructure needs, reduce energy use, and realize cost savings, construct resilient, locally prioritized infrastructure to withstand flooding and other extreme weather, and implement other community-based solutions to build resilience. Eligible entities for the grants would be local governments, tribal organizations, and community-based nonprofits. The next proposal expands the existing Green Step Cities program, consistent with input and feedback that we have received from the many existing participants, and specifically targeting investments in our local governments who are doing work to build resiliency to meet their own climate goals. Use of the program has grown substantially since its inception in 2010, and participants are extremely engaged in about adopting energy, water, and waste-saving practices and other environmental beneficial actions. This recommendation will increase the Green Step Cities program staff and budget by adding 1 FTE and operating funds to the annual budget, and the position will support the new activities through development and launching of the Green Step Cities programs, such as the Gold Leaf program, which would be a climate action program for local and tribal governments, and advancing the Green Step Tribal Nations and Green Step Schools program into permanent programs. So these are things that we've heard from participants and local governments that they would like to see more of. This proposal also comes from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and would expand the ability of our local partners to prevent waste, divert food, build organics recycling and other recycling programs, and most importantly, recycling markets. These investments are key, as we know that landfills and the waste that end up in landfills contribute to methane, which we've talked about is a very powerful greenhouse gas. Healthy recycling markets divert materials from the waste stream, convert those materials into commodities, and supply the materials to manufacturers for production of new products. So this really is an economic opportunity for communities and business owners across the state.
I'm gonna, Commissioner, I'm gonna take a moment and pause here. Since we have you guys, the whole committee, I'm gonna maybe see if there's questions before we move on to the Metropolitan Council piece. So Representative Kraft and then Representative Hornstein after that.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. Great presentation. Really appreciate you sharing this information. I would like to go back to the soil health program from the Board of Water and Soil Resources. My question is this expanding an existing program, or is this a new program? And then do you have some sense of, with this level of funding, how much it can address?
Commissioner?
Chair Cagle and Representative Kraft, excellent question. And I'm going to ask the Board of Soil and Water Resources to address your question, because my understanding is yes, but I am not the person who should be answering that question.
Maybe we can put that one in the back pocket for after the entire presentation and invite some other folks to come up. Would that be okay, Representative Kraft? Okay.
Madam Chair, I defer to you.
All right. Representative Hornstein?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for another excellent presentation. This is for Commissioner Kessler. There was an article, I think, in yesterday's Star Tribune about, and you referenced this in your introductory comments about greenhouse gas emissions declining, which is the good news. But I thought you had some excellent quotes in the paper about, you sounded a cautionary note that, while this is good, we have a long way to go. And I guess if you could just briefly elaborate on that on the record, because I think that's an important message, and maybe members of the committee haven't seen that particular press clip, but I thought that was insightful, and if you could maybe elaborate on that a little
Commissioner? Chair Cagle and Representative Hornstein, thank you. It's not always that you get quoted well in the paper, so I appreciate that you read it and that you, you think that that is the case. So yesterday, the Department of Commerce and the Pollution Control Agency submitted our biannual greenhouse gas emissions inventory to the legislature. And so we'll make sure that everyone gets a link to that. And the big takeaway is that since the beginning of the tracking period that we use as the benchmark for that report, which is 2005, emissions across the sectors have dropped by 23%, which is great. That's excellent. Good job, everyone. And then the next breath is we have a long way to go, because the goals that we are on track to meet, if those trends continue, were set based on that 2007 Next Generation Energy Act. So thank you to everyone for your leadership there. But we now know, based on the most up-to-date eminent science from the International Panel on Climate Change, that we need to be having more aggressive goals. And so the climate action framework that we talked about that was released in September includes more aggressive goals. And we need to do more across the state, across the sectors, in order to be on track to achieve those goals.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, just a quick, somewhat unrelated, but follow-up, but related to the PCA, if I can.
Go ahead, yes.
So on page 18, the last slide actually that you had referenced related to recycling and composting grants and loans. A couple of, I think the biennium before this, I had a bill that now Representative Akbaje is carrying, which was not enacted, but we had a specific program for renters and others that don't necessarily have access to organics recycling. For example, in Minneapolis, if you're a homeowner, you could put that on the curbside. And so I'm wondering if there are any kind of equity criteria in these grants and loans that those who don't have readily accessible composting, organics composting options can utilize.
Commissioner?
Chair Cagle and Representative Hornstein, thank you for that really important question. And I'll say that the Climate Action Framework and the budget really is trying to center our proposals and our investments around equity. And so as we develop the criteria for the grants, things like where there are barriers around multifamily housing and composting is something that we want to make sure we're thinking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Mr. Kolash on the goal of decreasing vehicle miles driven or traveled by the year 2050. Lofty goal, and asking for your ideas on how to achieve that, thinking of greater Minnesota, where we have to get in our cars and drive to do pretty much anything, get to work or get to the grocery store. Is that realistic in greater Minnesota?
Commissioner, or I'm sorry, Mr. Kolash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Anderson, I would defer to the Department of Transportation to speak to that. That is there a particular goal and their budget items in that? I think we can put that on the list to have a MnDOT representative come and speak to that after we're done with the presentation.
Perfect, thank you. Representative Gilman, then we have Franson, I go, and then I have a question, and then we'll move on with the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Kegel. Question for Commissioner, is it Kessler, right? So you just said, I just didn't catch that. How much do landfills give off the emissions? Did you say?
Chair Cagle and I can't see.
Gilman.
Representative Gilman, thanks for the question. I don't have the number specifically off the top of my head what the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions from landfills is, but I will tell you that the primary greenhouse gas that comes from landfills is methane, and we know that methane is 4 times stronger in terms of its warming potential than just plain carbon dioxide.
Representative Gilman?
Thanks. So just trying to understand, like I've been recycling since I was very young, and what I found in certain communities out in greater Minnesota is some of our recycling collection facilities are going away. So I feel like it's been hard for me to throw something that I would normally not throw into the garbage. My concern is we're going to have quite a crisis here, like for example, the HERC and different plants that, process all the waste and all the different things like that. Do you believe that landfills will grow exponentially because people have to still get rid of their waste? And will that have a direct impact on exactly what we're trying to mitigate right now?
Commissioner.
Chair Cagle and Representative Gilman, really good question. And I think part of our goal of putting forward the need to support greater Minnesota and portions of the state that don't have the capacity or the markets that they currently do is exactly to get at what you're saying. I think we recognize that many facets of the waste system need investment, and whether or not that's curbside organics or diversion of food waste or working with local entrepreneurs to reuse more materials or build recycling markets or invest in existing recycling markets, all of those things need to be on the table. We would like to have less landfills. I think there's a lot of things we could be doing with our land, and if we are successful in creating markets and diverting waste, then we don't have to think about methane from landfills being such a component of our greenhouse gas emission inventory.
Thank you. Representative Gilman, any follow-up?
That's good.
Thank you. Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'm just kind of wondering, this is a lot of lofty goals, and what impact will this have on global temperatures?
Mr. Kolash?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative Franson. That's always an important question, but what we look at is addressing climate change is going to take a collective action across the state, across the nation, across the globe to reduce emissions. We know that the greenhouse gas emissions are driving global temperature change. What we are seeking to address is reducing our contributions to the emissions so that we can minimize the temperature rise between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius, so that we are trying to avoid the most devastating impacts of a changing climate due to those temperature increases. So we don't do an individual temperature analysis on each individual action. That would not be a really relevant or useful bit of information. What we're looking to do is target our emissions, because we know that if we can lead the way and we can work with other states and we can work within the nation and then global partners, that we can reduce emissions that will minimize the temperature rise that's already expected to happen. And if we can get to net zero, we can start to slow the temperature increase, which will then reduce the impacts that are felt by people across the globe, but particularly in Minnesota. And noting that in Minnesota, we have seen a significant temperature rise since the late 1800s, more than 7 degrees in northern parts of Minnesota. For wintertime lows, more than 6 degrees in the central part, around 5 degrees Fahrenheit increase in the southern part. So we need to do our part to reduce emissions so that we are minimizing and avoiding the most devastating impacts of a changing climate.
Thank you. Representative Franson, quick follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Kolash, some would say that we're in a cooling period right now. Why do you get to decide what's useful or a relevant metric for us to consider?
I think that is something, I want to remind everybody that our committee, we're not, the Climate and Energy Committee is the one that's looking at the bigger picture of addressing climate change and also the environment. I want to focus our attention really on how are we adapting and what kind of physical infrastructure are we able to set up so that we, no matter what happens in the future, that we can adapt to it and make sure that our communities are resilient. So I think that's kind of not really I think that's more of the scientists that decide that. And so I would like if we could maybe, go ahead, Representative Franson.
Madam Chair, a little bit of a suggestion here then. Maybe for this committee, we don't have to have people like blabber on about climate change, climate change, climate change, climate change if you don't want questions about climate change. I'm still trying to figure out what the point of this committee is. I think we all are. We are in week 5 and we've had, what, 1 or 2 bills and haven't heard any bills, and it's slideshows about climate change. And so if this is the committee that we're going to ask about these questions or not, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what the point of this committee is then. My next question has to do with the measures of progress for clean transportation, which I found Representative Anderson's question interesting, and it prompted me to think of what's happening in Sweden. And in Sweden, they are trialing what's called geofencing for cars. And so is that something that you have thought about or are looking into? If you need more information on what Sweden's doing, I'm sure you can do a little Google of that, but fascinating in order to control where people go, time of day, to decrease their emissions. So I'm just kind of wondering, it seems like we follow what other countries are doing, and when can we expect geofencing?
Commissioner?
Chair Cagle, really interesting question, and I think that should be added to the list of things that we should ask the Department of
That's
Transportation.
what I was thinking as
Yeah.
well. Thank you. Representative Igo?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today. Good to see you again. My question is kind of about sustainable infrastructure, and I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Beijing released a report yesterday that they're considering sort of banning all solar exports to the United States. For reference, China makes up 80% of all solar production in the world. We have no solar production here in the United States. We take all those resources from China. So my question is, does the climate change subcabinet, are they aware of this proposal? Because this could mean drastic implications here for the state of Minnesota, especially with the adopting of HF7. We do not have a supply chain if this goes through to provide the solar energy that we need here in Minnesota.
Commissioner?
Chair Cagle and Representative Igo, thanks for the question. And yeah, I think we are tracking what is happening elsewhere, and I think the Department of Commerce is here. It can speak to unintended consequences of where we get our energy, imports of energy, and I think we should add that to the list of things that they can speak
Maybe
to when
we
they
should
come up.
just go on with the presentation and get the departments up here afterwards.
Matt,
Go
if I could
ahead.
just
Yep,
follow up quickly.
absolutely. Representative Igo.
I just wanted to close with that then, so thank you for bringing that point to the council then. And I would just ask that our state agencies then really start looking internally to Minnesota, because again, I always talk about we have the resources here to do so. So, between the MPCA and the DNR, we could really start utilizing our resources to permit places that are going to build this so we're not reliant on places like China.
Commissioner?
Yeah, Chair Cagle and Representative Igo, I will say that I have been to the Helene, I'm going to say it wrong, I've heard it pronounced several different ways, facility in, on the Iron Range, super impressive solar manufacturing facility. And I will say that part of our goal of having all of these agencies working together is to do exactly what you've called for, which is look for opportunities for Minnesotans to be innovators and leaders and economic opportunities to build this more resilient infrastructure that we need.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Representative Igo. All right, if you want to proceed with the presentation.
All right, thanks, Chair. So a few more within the Resilient Communities bucket. This proposal, four-year effort by the Met Council, will create an online tool set, including maps and associated databases, to help their local partners and engineers to protect their infrastructure from adverse climate change impacts. So the online tools will be developed in partnership with the local regional partners as well as state agencies, and the proposal will fund technical assistance, which will help local partners leverage the available information to catalyze action. This proposal from the Department of Commerce is designed to strengthen Minnesota's homes. As we know, Minnesota is warmer and wetter because of more frequent storm events. Growing damages and increased frequency is leading to an increase in insurance costs. The Department of Commerce is proposing approximately 32,000 or 30, or is proposing for 32,500 in fiscal year 22-23 and 1.23 million ongoing to provide grants for their work on homes that make them more resilient to climate change, helping Minnesotans to make improvements to their homes that strengthen them against severe storms that will build climate resilience on the individual level by preventing damage to homes and the community level by reducing insurance costs for everyone. And the last proposal within this bucket comes from the Department of Health. So we've talked about disruptive events, winds, drought, loss of power are on the rise and can affect public water systems' ability to provide safe drinking water. The Minnesota Department of Health is proposing $16.31 million in fiscal 22-25 to strengthen Minnesota's drinking water infrastructure. The proposal will help fill gaps for grants for emergency power supplies, backup wells, technical assistance on cybersecurity, mapping flood-prone areas, advancing water reuse in water systems, and develop renewable energy such as solar fields and drinking water supply management fields. drinking water supply management areas, and these projects will result in Minnesota communities having safer, more resilient drinking water. At this point, I'm going to transition back to Assistant Commissioner Kolash, and he will bring us through the end of the presentation, and then we can address any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I just want to point out and refer you to slide 15 for the Strengthen Minnesota Homes value. That request from the Department of Commerce is actually over $32 million. I think just a note of when we write fiscal notes, we write them in the thousands, and we don't always get those extra zeros in there. I just wanted to correct that for you. Department of Commerce is looking for more than $32 million on that. So turning to the clean energy and efficient buildings, as we were able to announce yesterday, Minnesota has made significant progress in producing clean electricity since 2005, achieving more than 54% emission reductions by replacing coal with cleaner sources of electricity, including wind and solar. We also see that investments in clean energy efficiency, and energy reliability will continue to create jobs, lower energy costs, and contribute to a more stable climate. One goal of this chapter is establishing the statewide standard to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040, and this will require actions like investing in our grid to accommodate more clean energy and updating buildings across Minnesota to be more energy efficient. Some of the priority actions in this area, in addition to the 100% carbon-free electricity standard, is adapting the grid, reducing emissions relating to the heating and cooling of homes and businesses, reducing energy use and waste, and improving codes and standards for all new commercial and large multifamily housing to achieve net zero by 2036. So the first budget item that I'd like to cover is from the Department of Commerce. And we understand that electric reliability is a critical priority for Minnesota. That's why the Department of Commerce is proposing to remove the sunset of energy planning and systems assessment, which is set to take place in June 2030. The energy planning and systems assessment ensures that Minnesotans can access reliable energy service, and that the Department of Commerce has the sufficient staffing it needs to support important work around energy transmission. Removing the sunset will allow the department to continue completing necessary technical analysis around transmission and continuing advocating on behalf of Minnesotans to ensure a reliable electric system. The next budget item I'll go over is again from the Department of Labor and Industry. The Department of Labor and Industry is proposing an appropriation of $146,000 once every 3 years that will fund updates to the Commercial Energy Code. Updated energy codes for commercial buildings and large multifamily buildings will reduce energy use, address climate change, and help Minnesota meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals. By changing energy codes, Minnesota will be on an accelerated trajectory to make new commercial buildings net zero by 2036. Without changing these commercial energy codes, achieving net zero in new commercial buildings may take an additional 10 to 15 years. The next budget item comes from the Department of Commerce, their Solar on Schools proposal. This proposal seeks $61.5 million in one-time appropriations from the general fund to expand on the current Solar for Schools statewide pilot program. The initial interest for the Solar for Schools program has been significant, but the pilot project was geographically limited to the Xcel Energy service territory. Expansion will allow schools to be eligible outside of the Xcel service area and meet the demands from schools asking to participate. The Department of Administration has requested $1.2 million in fiscal year 2024 for ongoing funding of sustainability staff at state agencies. State agencies have goals to reduce their energy use, water consumption, and waste. Achieving these goals ultimately saves agencies money and allows them to focus on their core mission. The proposal funds staff to support sustainability work at agencies that have not had the most opportunity for sustainability and efficiency improvements. Staff time is needed to plan, organize, and coordinate implementation of the improvement projects. Agencies throughout the enterprise have voiced the need for resources to implement the recommendations of the Office of Enterprise Sustainability provides to them. Moving to the Healthy Lives and Communities Goal chapter of the Climate Action Framework, we understand that Minnesota's changing climate threatens the health of all our communities, but that not everyone experiences these impacts equally. Low-income residents, communities of color, and others face the biggest burden of climate impacts in Minnesota. We must protect the health and well-being of all Minnesotans in the face of climate change, reducing the health impacts of climate change, including increases in heat-related illnesses, respiratory conditions, disease transmission, and by ticks and mosquitoes, and the physical and emotional costs of extreme weather is a crucial part of our climate work. The particular priorities in this area include raising awareness of health impacts from climate change, funding and supporting community-led initiatives across Minnesota, preparing for diseases, tracking, monitoring, and compiling a regular report on the health impacts of climate change in Minnesota, adapting outdoor recreations on public lands for a changing climate and changing demographics, assessing healthcare resilience to ensure hospitals and other facilities can withstand extreme weather, and providing proactive health services that deliver culturally appropriate, affordable, and responsive health care and mental health services to protect public health and create a foundation for climate resiliency. Under this goal chapter, the Metropolitan Council has proposed $12 million in one-time funds for the modernization of the Twin Cities regional parks and trails. Changing weather patterns and a rapidly diversifying metropolitan population drive the need to modernize outdoor recreation experience in these parks. This is a one-time cash infusion needed to help restore and improve existing facilities to ensure that they can continue to provide the benefits that people have come to associate with regional parks and trails system for current and future generations. Examples of work could include enhancements to visitor services, water and trailhead amenities, wayfinding, trail maintenance, and natural resources improvements. The Department of Health is also seeking $18 million for fiscal years 2024 and 2025 for public health resiliency activities. This initiative strengthens the department's ability to provide needed information on the changing and increasing health impacts of climate change so that agencies and communities are aware of the risks and can plan ahead. This includes preparation for health impacts from increasingly heavy precipitation, flooding, drought, extreme heat, wildfire smoke, and emerging zoonotic, waterborne, and vector-borne diseases. This proposal builds community health resiliency through proactive funding and technical assistance to local organizations and local public health agencies so they can plan for and implement the appropriate community-based and locally led actions that protect their health from climate change risks. And moving on to the final chapter is the clean economy chapter. We know that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is an opportunity to build an economy that addresses climate change and equitably provides family-sustaining jobs for Minnesotans across our state. Transitioning to a clean economy must include solutions that benefit everyone. By some estimates, Minnesota can create 16,000 additional jobs by 2025 and 39,000 additional jobs by 2050 if we take actions to significantly reduce our carbon emissions. Achieving this goal will require public and private investments in emerging research and technology as the workforce development to ensure Minnesotans are prepared for the job opportunities created in our new clean economy. The goal priority actions in this area include completing a clean economy workforce and economic development plan. We also want to encourage innovation in Minnesota businesses. We want to develop worker skills by creating a workforce strategies that train, upskill, and reskill workers to adapt to changing technologies and job needs. We want to support power plant host communities. We want to identify and remove barriers to employment and training for women, people of color, and individuals with disabilities. And we want to assist businesses moving towards sustainability. The first budget item that I want to highlight here comes from the Department of Labor and Industry. The department is seeking $3 million in funding from the Workforce Development Fund to grow apprenticeships opportunities for clean economy occupations. This proposal would provide grants to registered apprenticeship training programs. These grants could be used to purchase new equipment, fund training to build clean technology skills among workers and apprentices. Examples include tools, supplies, materials to update solar labs in training in solar technologies and energy storage, train the trainer coursework to help instructors teach new technologies to apprentices and incumbent workers, electric vehicle charging stations for training centers so trainees can learn how to install and service this equipment. As the technology is constantly changing, training programs must similarly adapt to ensure a skilled workforce is proficient in evolving technologies. The next highlighted budget item comes from the Department of Employment and Economic Development. The department is proposing $10 million in the next biennium to assist communities where there's planned closure of a power plant. Several communities in Minnesota and nationwide find the closure of power plants with trepidation because of the potential negative economic impacts. In Minnesota, 8 to 10 cities and counties are currently or will soon be dealing with power plant closures and as the state transitions out of a fossil fuel-fired power plants. This funding would aid communities and their planning processes to recover from the loss of tax base and jobs resulting from the planned closures of the power plants. These investments will provide much-needed resources to host communities to facilitate planning and diversify their economy. Next highlighted budget item comes from the Department of Commerce. The department is proposing $2.63 million in 2024 and $21.34 million in 2025, and then $690,000 a year in ongoing funds for the Weatherization Assistance Program. This proposal aims to both supplement the current federal Weatherization Assistance Program by serving more households and allowing services that would otherwise be denied due to current federal limitations in the program. The funds would also be used to establish a weatherization training grant program at the Department of Commerce. Continuing with the Department of Commerce, the department is also seeking $113.75 million in the next biennium for a state competitiveness fund. The Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act are historic opportunities with more than 20 pots of federal money totaling billions of dollars. This proposal provides critical state matching funds to secure Minnesota's share of federal funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. It also provides funding to help rural, tribal, and disadvantaged communities compete for federal grants. This action will support all of the goals in the Climate Action Framework by making sure Minnesota has access to federal funding. So I understand that was a great deal of information. We have discussed many of the proposals, but not all of the climate-related budget proposals that the governor put forward. But we wanted to particularly focus on those related to infrastructure and be able to focus and answer questions with this committee. We have representatives for many of the other agencies in the climate change sub-cabinet here to answer additional questions on these proposals and about ones we did not discuss in details. I encourage everyone to visit the website on the slide here to access the Climate Action Framework, which includes the framework itself, but also additional materials which identifies more than 200 potential actions that can be taken to reduce emissions, build resiliency in our communities and our landscapes and our critical services and our businesses, address inequities, and build a clean economy for Minnesota. Again, thank you for your time and interest, and we are all available for questions at this time.
Thank you both so much. So I guess my first question is probably the commissioner. How are the agencies interacting when it comes to layering the projects and layering the funding so that we can hit multiple benefits at one time?
Yeah, Chair Cagle, thanks for that really important question. And I think this will be a theme that you'll hear from everyone, that we really want to maximize this opportunity in the budget and also the opportunity presented to the state from the federal funds. I mean, I think this is a transformational moment in time. We want to make sure Minnesota gets at least or more than our share. And through the climate subcabinet, we have developed a strong network of leaders and then staff teams to make sure that we are talking to one another about grant opportunities, who's applying for what type of federal funding, how we can support one another's applications. If the MPCA grant services folks are identifying something that seems like it should be something the state should be taking advantage of, but it's not entirely within the purview of the MPCA, we are making sure that we are connecting with the Department of Ag or DNR or Health or Commerce or Transportation to ensure that we are at least on the beginning applying for the right grants. I think how we get the money and how we get the money out the door in a way that is efficient and consistent with the values that I think we all hold is really important work that's ongoing. And we need to be coordinating to make sure that we do that efficiently as well, because otherwise we will not achieve the goals we have or maximize the opportunity this presents.
And how are you interfacing with the local governments, tribal governments, nonprofits, to make sure that they're getting the resources as well.
Really important question, Chair Cagle. So we have been across the agency starting to talk to our key partners. I will tell you that in each tribal consultation that we hold, this is a part of the conversation. In each conversation that we're in with local mayors or regional partners, we are talking about this. We are listening to their suggestions as we think about how to design the grant programs, how to think about efficient delivery, and how to put equity at the center of this. So engagement will be key in making sure we get this right, because as you've heard, many of this is pass-through dollars designed to meet local needs. And we like to think that we are helpful, but we don't necessarily always have the right unique perspective of the local partner. And so putting that perspective in the front of the conversation and through the consideration of the designing the grants and delivering of the grants will be really key.
And last question for me, and then I'll invite the departments to come up and answer member questions. But what are some of the barriers or gaps that the state can be helpful in addressing to make sure that locals, agencies, whoever qualifies can get this funding?
So super important question. Thanks, Chair Cagle. And I will say that I think when you talk about this coordinated, very complex work, we should be thinking about what are we really good at? What is somebody else really good at? And how we can build a team so that everyone is maximizing their strengths. And I think the state does a good job of providing technical assistance to folks and helping navigate through complex grant processes. But I also think that sometimes the Pollution Control Agency isn't the trusted local partner. So how do we set this program or these programs up so we are leveraging the expertise of others who would be best suited to deliver on the ground advice or be the partner at the local level to help with grant applications? And so I think that's a long way of saying I think it's a work in progress, and we need to make sure that we're bringing everybody to the table, whether that's the coordinated state agencies, our local partners, the mayors, the people who represent the public works and the utilities, as well as the advocates and environmental justice communities to make sure that their voices are front and foremost.
Thank you. With that, I'll ask Representative Kraft, did you want to ask Bowser your question? If maybe we can get the water and soil to come up, and please identify yourself for the record. And I don't know if you remember his question, or if you'd like to restate your question, Representative Kraft.
Madam Chair, sure, I can restate it. So it was on the soil health program, and my question was, is this expanding an existing program? And then very interested in the program, and then also how much do you think this level of funding can address?
Please introduce yourself for the record and answer Representative Kraft's question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Andrea Fish. I'm Assistant Director for Strategy and Operations at the Board of Water and Soil Resources. And Madam Chair, Representative, to your questions, I have two answers for you. The first relates to whether it's an expansion of an existing program. Bit of a long answer that I'll try to keep brief. We were initially provided funding to develop the program, to come up with outline and achievables, to make sure we had everything in place to launch a program. And now we are at what I would call the launch phase. So we are ready to go, ready to fully implement our soil health program statewide. As it relates to the second question regarding what we will do with the funding, we have anticipated how some of this funding would be used, whether it's through grant making, technical assistance, outreach, planning assistance, and we have some guesstimates for what the demand might be. That said, with a lot of state programs, we have really solid guesses, and then once something gets going, it does change a little bit. My offer for today is to see what kind of information we can get that's currently under the proverbial hood and get that to you and members of the committee related to what we've used to anticipate the demand for the program and what we, again, anticipate for outcomes of the program in terms of acres that are participating or possibly even carbon sequestration.
Thank you. Representative Kraft?
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick comment in general. So I really appreciate, as we've gone through this, I mean, it's called the climate budget, but when you actually go into it, soil health, buildings, waste, transportation, all kinds of infrastructure things that, maybe they're climate-related investments, but we're actually improving infrastructure and improving lives along the way. So I really appreciate this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, MnDOT, if you would like to come to, did you have soil and water?
No, but aren't we asking questions about this?
Yep, I got a list of, so MnDOT, if you'd like to come to the, so Representative Anderson, I had you on for MnDOT, and then Representative Franson for you for MnDOT. So, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a quick update again. How do you propose reducing vehicle miles driven in greater Minnesota?
And Commissioner, if you'd like to introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nancy Daubenberger. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joined here today by my colleague Tim Sexton, who's our Assistant Commissioner for the Sustainability, Planning, and Program Management Division of MnDOT. And to the question on vehicle miles traveled reduction and strategies to achieve that throughout the state. So in our statewide multimodal transportation plan, which we just completed an update, which was a process over the last couple of years of engaging all of our stakeholders in looking at the future of transportation. It's our highest level policy plan and what goals we should be using as we're looking forward into the next 20 years. It's a 20-year plan, updated every 5 years. And a recommendation that came through our Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council was the vehicle miles traveled reduction, and to achieve 20% per capita by 2050. And then we backed that down to about 14% by 2040 at the end of the 20-year plan. And we do recognize and need to work with our stakeholders over the years of the plan, of course, as we're implementing all of our goals. But we do recognize strategies will be different in different areas of the state, different sectors. It's not a goal that's evenly applied across all modes. But in the greater Minnesota area, rural areas, we look at strategies like broadband build out being such that could provide different access to work, to schools, to health care in ways that are different than we've accessed those in the past. So that's just one example. But again, we're really looking forward to working with our stakeholders on implementing our statewide multimodal transportation plan and achieving our goals.
Representative Anderson? Representative Franson?
Thank you. So you also have, or Madam Chair, there is a reach 20% electric vehicles on Minnesota roads by 2030. An estimate of the EVs on the road right now is about 30,000, and there's really no funding available except through the IIJA match. We're looking at needing, according to your lofty goals, 970,000 more EVs on the road. What are your plans for achieving that?
Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Franson. So as part of our Governor's One Minnesota plan budget recommendations, it is to provide funding to leverage those federal dollars coming through IIJA, as you mentioned, to build out our EV charging infrastructure throughout the state. And when we have our EV infrastructure built out, of course, that will allow those who are a little more hesitant about purchasing electric vehicles to move in that direction. And as part of our IIJA funding, every state, including Minnesota, needed to put together what we call our NEVI plan, our National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan. So that is posted on our website, and that talks about the plan for the state as we move toward electric vehicles.
Thank you. And we also have, I know that part of the EV bill that we heard last week was there were tax credits in there for EV bills as well, I believe. Is that correct? And so that might be a help lift some of that burden too. Representative Franson?
Yep. So thank you, Madam Chair. So as I'm chatting with people about the EVs and there's just, people just can't afford them even with the tax credit. Just because you say there's a tax credit doesn't mean people are rushing there because now they can magically afford to put that into their budget. It's so if they can't afford even with the tax credits that everybody's bragging about, what's the plan?
Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. At this point, electric vehicles do have that higher upfront cost, but then lower costs of maintenance and service over the years. And with incentives, our automakers are looking at how they can be bringing down the costs as they're continuing to make more vehicles. And I know my Assistant Commissioner colleague has been involved in other discussions on that too. And if okay with you, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it to him to see if he has anything to add to that.
Assistant Commissioner Sexton?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Franzen. It's a great question. Right now, you're right. Electric vehicles do, on average, cost more than the average internal combustion engine vehicle. One of the reasons, though, is that the technology is new. We have seen decreasing costs over time, particularly with the decreasing cost of batteries. A very precipitous drop, in fact, and so we expect those costs to come down. The other thing that's really important, I think, though, is to, because EVs are still pretty new and there maybe isn't as big of a market in the state, we have fewer used vehicles. So as the market grows, we'll have more used vehicles, which will provide some lower cost options. But you're right now, even with the tax credit, these are unaffordable to a lot of people. And so I think that over time, those costs are going to come down. And I think that's going to be a big key to the overall increase in adoption. The other thing, just to build on Commissioner Daubenberger's comments before about our strategy, it is really to make sure that if and when people want and choose to adopt an electric vehicle, that they have access to charging, whether they live in an apartment, a house, if they're in the cities, or if they're in greater Minnesota. And so in addition to the federal funding that we're prioritizing right now along a couple key corridors, there's also a discretionary program through the federal government, through the IIJA, that has about $2.5 billion available. And those are going to be grants that local communities, tribes, even some NGOs and special districts can apply for directly to make sure that communities across the state have access to charging. So.
Follow-up?
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. With a follow-up there, so we have about $20 million of IAG funding, correct, for the credits at about $2,500, right, tax credit? So would that be, now if I do my math, that's about 8,000 cars or 8,000 vehicles that would cover? Is that correct? Is that math correct, or am I doing this wrong?
Mr. Sexton? I think the IRA is where the tax credits
Okay, the
come for-
IRA.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I believe there's 7,500. I believe. Yeah. Okay. Just got my phone.
That's federal. That's
federal. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the I believe and then 2,500
For the state.
In the state one.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So. But that bill has not passed yet.
Right, but so my question is, how many cars or how many cars would that cover?
What is the fund that we're putting into
Yep.
that? Okay.
So we need 970,000 more EV vehicles on the road to reach this clean transportation goal. We have 30,000 estimated right now. We have these tax credits available if you can afford it. How many more vehicles do these tax credits get on the road? How's that for a better question?
Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. Great question, and I think we'll need to look into that, do a little math, and get back to the committee on
Yeah, I
that.
think we'd have to look at the fiscal note for that bill too and see what the request for funding was on that. So we can.
And then
look at-
one final question.
Sure, go ahead. And then we
Final.
have, IGO is on the list for commerce, but we can move on out, and Representative Gilman, you can be next then. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you, and thanks for coming in front of us today. So back to Representative Anderson's question about the mileage. I mentioned, I think you were here regarding geofencing. you mentioned in your answer to him about broadband. So now I'm very curious, how does broadband reduce miles per capita?
Commissioner?
What do you plan? Do you plan on staying in our homes and living off of broadband, or what, you know?
Commissioner? I already do. Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative. Great question about broadband. As I noted, that is just one strategy that could potentially reduce vehicle miles traveled if it is such where it's built out throughout the state. All Minnesotans have access to that, and they're able to change how they do their trips because they have more access to technology.
Thank you. Representative Gilman?
All right, thank you, Chair. And I think my question is there anybody here from the Department of Labor
Yeah.
or the CCLD, like the commercial
Yep,
coding?
if you'd like to come up to the rostrum, please.
Thank you.
Yeah. testify if you-
Okay.
Welcome to the committee. If you could just state your name for the record. If Representative Gilman, if you'd like to ask your question, please.
Okay, hi there. Ask my question.
go ahead.
Oh, I don't know who you are, though. Can I find out who you are?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just so I can, sorry.
We're a little informal here, I guess.
Okay, that's fine.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Kate Prushek, and I'm Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Labor and Industry.
Okay.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Scott McClellan. I'm the Director of Construction Codes and Licensing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Chair. It's helpful. I'm new here, just in case you wondered. Appreciate you both being here. Thanks for coming up. A couple of things that I was curious about. I have a daughter that's in the union in construction. And I see that there's a $3 million ask, and then also on page 24, $146,000 every 3 years construction code fund. If we ask our laborers, like, how they like construction codes, I'd be curious what your stakeholders say about that. And I see that, clean energy and efficient buildings priority action, improve codes and standards for all new commercial and large multifamily buildings. So this would not impact, this is all just for new construction, it looks like. What about all existing construction? And would this be, in this coding, would there be like an elimination for gas stoves, looking at water heaters, heating sources, things like that? And are you asking your unions, are you talking to your people on how these codes and implementation could impact things exponentially with cost and just the affordability and for people to even participate in new construction?
I will defer to whoever would like to answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll answer the first part of that question. Certainly, we are very engaged with stakeholders. We have a Construction Codes Advisory Council, and they have a statutory duty to help evaluate any legislation that impacts building construction. So we frequently rely on what we call the CCAC, apologies for the acronym, to help us evaluate those, any proposals that impacts Chapter 300 or 326B. In addition, our statutes require that we evaluate cost, and we take cost into account when we're modifying building codes. So certainly, cost is a factor. Yes, you're correct. The proposal primarily impacts new commercial construction and large multifamily buildings, so the proposal does not impact residential construction at this point. There is a component that would impact existing commercial buildings undergoing alteration or change in use, and I can let my colleague get into the details of that more. But to get back to your first question about involving, apprentices and labor and what they think of the codes, what they have said is they appreciate statewide uniform codes that minimize complexity. So for us, we really promote and support our statewide building code. So right now, local governments aren't allowed to implement codes that exceed the statewide building code. But I'll turn it to Scott, if I may, to answer your other questions.
Go ahead, sorry.
Madam Chair, Representative, could you maybe just zero in your question that I can address.
Okay, so with the new, thank you, Chair. I'm getting her down. So with this advisory council, I'm guessing they partner also with the CCLD as well.
Yes.
Would that be, in the new coding, would we be eliminating gas stoves, the infrastructure around water heaters, things that, impact huge with HVAC and different things like that? Is that a part of the plan to head that direction? And again, like when I look up statewide codes, I love that you brought that up, versus having some local control. Again, if we look at our state, not every area of our state is created equal. It is not equal. And when you look at cost affordability, my concern is putting undue things onto taxpayers to pick up the pieces for people when we implement codes that are unrealistic to meet. So I'm a little concerned if that the gas stoves, water heaters, things like that are part of your new coding system and new plan for Minnesota.
Mr. McClellan?
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. So the legislation we're discussing here is for commercial buildings, first of all, and high-rise residential, basically. So in the residential single-family market, this would not be impacted by that. But even in the high-rise residential, the commercial codes we're looking at isn't targeting some necessarily radical things like eliminating gas appliances. Those are usually regulated through efficiency standards from the federal government. They establish when you can and can't use, and there used to be gas lights out in front of your homes many years ago, and the government since outlawed that because it was just exorbitant use of natural gas. But the agency has no plans to do anything like eliminating gas stoves or related appliances, no.
And I think one of the cool parts of the IRA is just the incentives that it's offering for a lot of these things. I think we kind of tend to get a lot more with carrots, although somebody suggested that we should maybe start calling it a candy bar at the end of the stick. And so that's where I really think the incentives piece is important. And so Representative Gilman, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So, and you brought this up, thank you, Chair. So I just want to go back to those carrots. I'm going to say carrots because I like candy bars too. But again, it's taxpayer dollars, and I believe that we end up changing our codes and we end up changing how we do things based on how many dollars we can get. And that can have a negative impact as well as a positive impact. And so my question is if you're saying the federal government's doing some regulations, then what I see happening is then the state has to get on board so we can capture these dollars. Then we'll go with this or this or this. And then it ends up being something that I believe as a manufacturing company owner, a business owner, when we impose things on our coding, it's a slippery slope. And so I'd be concerned about rapidly going one direction or investing in, different coding things that could have a huge impact on the cost. And so when you go back to now, you talked about residential, like high rise, we didn't talk about commercial. And I mean, commercial ends up getting an extra wall up of how can we incentivize and make Minnesota a great place for people to want to come bring their businesses here instead of fleeing here. And we have to start cutting some of the red tape. So that's what I really care about,
Yeah. And I think that you and I are really on the same page with this.
Oh, good.
I mean, just
Good.
the ease of access, I think, is something that I'd really like to address as far as some of these local communities. And, really making sure that it's a consumer-friendly product that we are putting out to our local communities, to our tribes, to our NGO, nonprofits, that there's a real ease of adoption so that it isn't painful. I've talked, I'm sure, with many of you about this, about how I am probably the worst person when it comes to changing my behavior. I'm always going to take a 20-minute hot shower, and I'm going to warm my car up. I'm horrible at changing behaviors, and so No, that always makes it easier, huh? So I don't know if you'd like to respond at all, or?
Madam Chair, Representative, I could just say again that the agency has no intention of going into those areas that usually the federal government preempts us. For example, like you mentioned HVAC as well. Usually they establish equipment efficiencies that manufacturers have to do by a certain date. So today you can still use 80% efficient furnaces, but at some point the federal government may say that has to be at least 90%. And then manufacturers, that's all they can produce. So we're leaving that up to any federal mandate that may come down, as it's dealing with equipment in particular. Just like, outlawing incandescent light bulbs, we don't get into that. We may require LEDs in new commercial, but for the most part, we're not overstepping into the realm of equipment efficiencies.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite then Commerce to come down. So thank you very much.
Okay.
There's a couple questions for Commerce. So first we will go to Representative Igo's question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So kind of going off what we were talking about with the supply chain in regards to solar panel materials, right? Helene was mentioned. Helene gets all their materials from a place like China. So how can Minnesota make sure we're investing in ourselves? Because I see a scary picture here with being dependent on these nations if they're going to put these export rules in. All of these goals that we've talked about for the last hour and a half become unattainable.
Welcome to the committee. If you could just state your name for the record.
Madam Chair, for the record, Peter Brickwitty, Assistant Commissioner at the Commerce Department. Representative, I think an important question, and one that deals more with the foreign policy of the United States and China than it does with the state policy. But I think there have been a number of reports. I haven't read the Wall Street Journal article that you mentioned, but I have seen some of the other reports, and some of the other manufacturing facilities that had previously been located in China have relocated around Southeast Asia, and there's this macro level sort of dynamic between our nation and China, which I think is an important one to be attentive to. And I think your point is very well taken about supply chain growth within the United States. I think Minnesota has an opportunity to play. We have that example of a manufacturing facility in northern Minnesota on the range who has gone through several stages of development. And I think we will want to promote that as we continue to grow the production of solar and homegrown energy writ large across the state of Minnesota. So I think I don't have a specific definitive answer for you on how we will solve to that problem, but it is something that we will have to be aware of as we move forward towards the goals that are laid out in the Climate Action Framework.
Representative Igo.
I'll just follow up. Like I said, obviously it's federal policy, but as we enact state policy, we need to fall in line with what's kind of going on around us and be aware of our surroundings. We always talk about a global climate, we're a global people, etc. We need to be aware of these things because there is no, like I said, Helene gets their solar ingots and solar wafers from China. They have 80% of the production. We have no production of those critical components of solar panel infrastructure here in the United States. We don't even have any of the resources capable because we're not mining, we're not producing, we're not manufacturing. So I would really like to see when we talk about this climate framework in the subcommittee that the governor's put together, mining is not included in there, manufacturing is not included in there. And we cannot continue to be reliant on the people, or these pipe dream goals that we have of being sustainable aren't going to happen. Because as we're seeing, the concern I've been raising for years down here was just announced yesterday in Beijing. And we need to start adapting right now.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Representative Anderson.
Thanks. Just a quick comment and then a question for Commerce. I support additional funding for drinking water infrastructure, and I would hope that $60 million would go to the PFA, which does a really good job in allocating funding for folks across the state. So that's my comment. My question to Commerce is that, with Minnesota moving to renewable energy by the year 2040, I think it's pretty common agreement that we're going to have a lot more transmission lines to have this reliable electricity for us. And just wondering, you're going to be doing this assessment for $1 million, but any general comments before we get into that about the amount and scope of transmission lines additionally needed to keep Minnesota, keep the grid up and running with reliance on wind and solar?
Mr. Brickwitty.
Madam Chair, Representative, excellent question. I think a really important consideration, not just for our state, but for our region and the country. There was, I think, an exciting announcement from Minnesota Power and its parent company about a major transmission investment that company is making, just I think in the paper today. I think we're going to need to make considerable infrastructure investments in our transmission and in our grid to make sure that we have sustainable and reliable electric production and transmission for residential consumers, for businesses, and for everyone who lives in the state and works in the state. I think that is at several levels, right? There's the macro sort of interstate transmission investments like the nature of the one that Minnesota Power made the announcement yesterday and brings power across the sectors of the United States that are divided into the distribution systems. I think we're also going to need to be looking at hardening our infrastructure at the local level, at a local distribution level, and that has significant implications for the development of residential distributed generation, so like rooftop solar or other small generated facilities that produce some of the climate resiliency that is talked about in the climate action framework. So I think it's a really important question. I don't have a definitive answer of like, this is the amount, this is the investment amount needed, these are the specific lines that we will do. MISO, the regional grid operator that we are part of for most of Minnesota, just recently, last year, I think, announced approximately $2 billion investment needed to build out transmission across the region. But that's something that Minnesota alone is not paying for. We are part of that group, and so utilities and partners, ratepayers will be looking at that through the regulatory process, not just in Minnesota, but across the entire MISO region.
Representative Anderson?
Thanks again, Madam Chair. So just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned an announcement today or yesterday by Minnesota Power. Again, just broadly speaking, when a company announces a plan for that, about how long, if everything falls into place, does it take from the announcement to completion when that electricity is flowing through that line?
Mr. Brickwitty?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative, I think it depends on the construction project. So if memory serves, and I might have to quickly pull it back up on my phone, but having read the article this morning, I think the projection for that particular line was hoping to be operational by 2029. I'll have to double check that, and I'll correct myself, Representative, when I get back to my chair if I've got that wrong. But again, it's going to depend on the nature of the project, and I think that's part of why having the climate action framework as a longer-term roadmap for the state helps us think about these questions in a not just immediate short-term sort of fire drill way, but also to make longer-term smart investments about where we want to grow over time and balance the need for reliable service with our goals for decarbonizing and continuing to grow our clean energy economy here in the state.
Thank you, Mr. Brickwitty. Thank you, Representative Anderson. And I think that kind of really brings us back to the reason why I thought this was an important committee for us to address is that we do need to look beyond that 2-year budget cycle. And we need to bring up questions like how are mining and manufacturing going to be impacted by this? And so I think that this was a really great conversation today, and it just really kind of reinforces my idea that our infrastructure is like kind of our bodies, and that all of these systems are so interdependent on each other. And I think we really have to kind of stop looking at it through a silo and realize how much one sector impacts the other sector, impacts the other sector, impacts the other sector, and how we are changing the way that we use our infrastructure systems. I can sit in my basement and have food delivered to me and my groceries delivered to me and work from my computer. And so, our lives are changing, our world is changing, and our state better change with it. And so I'm really grateful that all of you are engaged in this and thinking about it in the bigger picture. So I appreciate everybody who came today to present that. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.